Welcome to the Meg and Maggi Podcast, where we bring you conversations of overall wellness. We believe in challenging the all or nothing approach to our health by focusing on simple and sustainable practices for your everyday life.
We are so happy you're here with us. Now let's get into today's episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Meg and Maggi Podcast. Today, we have another very special guest for you on the show. We know you guys are really loving the episodes where we interview other people, and today is definitely going to be a great one. So today, we are interviewing Danielle Tallman. Danielle is a functional medicine certified health coach, and she's also a yoga instructor. And she has a vast knowledge of holistic nutrition and lifestyle. And she believes that true wellness is already within us, not something we get from an outside source. And she's dedicated to helping others discover what it means to live well. And with that, we are so excited to have her here on the show. And we are going to pick your brain until you are so tired of talking to us. But I know that this is going to be a great conversation. So welcome, Danielle.
Yay. Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me on. I'm very excited. And you can definitely pick my brain. This is stuff I could talk about for hours and hours. So
perfect. Don't tell two podcast hosts that. No, we're excited to have you on. Can you start, Danielle, by telling us, so functional, I'm even like struggling through it. So I know our listener probably like, wait, what did Maggie say? You're a functional, how you do it.
Okay. You do it. Yes. So my official title is a functional medicine certified health coach. So basically taking apart those words, I'm a health coach that was trained with in a background of foundation of functional medicine. So we can get into what functional medicine is and then also what a health coach is, because that is not an uncommon reaction. Whenever I tell people that, they're like, they either just look at me with a blank stare or they're like, I don't know what that is. So
that's awesome. So yes, if you could like piece us through that a little bit, because it's a mouthful, those words, but they all make sense going together.
Yeah, it's definitely a mouthful. So we'll start with what functional medicine is. So the easiest way for me to explain it is sort of with an analogy. And I'll first start by saying that functional medicine is the why of a disease or of a health state, whereas conventional medicine is the what, right? So in conventional medicine, you look at a symptom and you say, this symptom is related to this disease, and this is how we're going to treat it. In functional medicine, we are looking at, why is this symptom happening? It's not because you have this disease, there's a root cause. So that's really what it is it's looking for the root cause of a symptom so that you can address it from downstream. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we love that type of language on this podcast.
Yes. And going further with the analogy, for more visual, when there's a leaky faucet, conventional medicine comes in with a mop and it's just trying to mop up all that water that's leaking out of the faucet. And then functional medicine goes and just turns the faucet off or fixes the leak, right? If there's a crack in the pipe, that's where the water's coming from. So you have to dig deeper. You have to go beyond the symptoms that you see on the outside or the obvious symptoms to find out what's really going on.
I love that. Like Meg said, that is really one of the foundations of everything we do here on the show, right? Not necessarily medicine related, but health related, right? And so wellness related, and how can we get down to what is actually the root cause, right? Like we can see a symptom, we can see a problem that we are having, and like you said, we can take one of two routes, right? We can just try to mop it up and pretend like it's not happening, try to get rid of it faster than it's coming, or we can take an extra step, which might be a little bit slower of a process, right? But actually get down to the root and stop it altogether. So that is, I'm just so excited for our listeners to learn more about that, because even for me as someone related to that field, you just don't hear about it that much. It's not mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that people are talking about. And I
Yeah.
love to learn a little bit more about what you do as the health coach within functional medicine.
Yeah. And then, I also want to back up a little bit and just say that there's definitely a place for conventional medicine. And when I say conventional medicine, what I really mean is like, like doctors using medications or surgery, like emergency medicine, those are absolutely crucial and needed. But where I think the disconnect is between functional medicine and conventional medicine is when we're talking about chronic illness or lifestyle diseases, so heart disease, metabolic diseases like diabetes, anything that's a chronic lifelong condition, conventional medicine is just not equipped to focus on those types of diseases. And that's where most of us are suffering. So I just wanted to add in that little thing because we need antibiotics, we need surgeons and surgery and all of those really important acute types of treatment.
I like that. I think that's a really helpful clarification because Maggie and I, we talk about this with a lot of different topics, but a lot of times people are always so quick to go, because I used to be so quick to go to like, okay, what is it though? Is it one or the other, right? It's either we're only functional medicine or we're only conventional medicine. So I really like that you backed us up for a second and said, nope, there's room for both here. And we're going to discuss why. And it's making me think of, well, we can probably get into it. I'll save this thought for a moment later. But I think that it's really important to recognize that what you're sharing with us today has room at the same time for conventional needs of many people.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, functional medicine is not just, closed in either. It's a compilation of conventional medicine and more Eastern traditions, and it brings in spirituality. It really looks at the person as a whole, not in isolated body systems or, it under functional medicine, the ideology behind it recognizes that the mind and the body and the spirit are all connected and all really important for health. Yes. So we can, if you want, we can go back now into what I do as a health coach, unless Maggie, you look like you have another question.
I don't have a question. I love we just started this conversation and it's just making me so happy because this is the type of conversation around our health that we need to be having, right? Because we get so caught up in all of the surface level details, or we, go down some tiny rabbit hole on one tiny little piece of one system, right? And we need to, from time to time, but usually take a step back and look at a person as a whole, right? We are a whole human with different body systems that all work together, right? Like you said, there's a time and a place to pull them apart and to dive really deep into one particular thing, right?
Yeah.
But for the most part, we need to be looking at how all of the different systems and components of us as humans work together to truly find health, right? And we can't do that if we are constantly pulling everything apart, and not seeing how it works together. And so I'm just very happy. I'm very excited to have this conversation.
Good. Yeah. And I also, one more thing, I feel like I'm going to keep thinking of things to mention, but what you just said really made me think about how, yes, it's important to look at everything as a whole and also understand that each person is so different. And that's another really important aspect of functional medicine, is that it treats everybody as an individual and that we all have our individuality, meaning that, just because we all have the same body systems does not mean that they work the same as somebody else. So
what I think is so special about you, Danielle, and I can already tell, and we're only maybe 10 minutes into this episode, is that a lot of times the I'm like, do I want to use these words? Because I consider myself someone like this sometimes, but like, I think a lot of times the world of, more natural approach and holistic approach, sometimes it gets like the labels slapped on it of like granola and hippy dippy and like, just woo woo type stuff. And I can say that because I identify more as someone who is like that. And so I'm allowed to say this. But
Yeah.
what I think is so refreshing about you and what is so important is that you can embrace a lot of those more, natural and mindful and holistic views while at the same time pairing it with science. And I think that's a really new-ish wave that's coming into our health system. It's not mainstream yet. Maybe in some areas, I'm sure LA is already, combined these two worlds, but that is not in our everyday conversations yet. And so to have someone like you who will go on and you can, touch on more of now what you do as a health coach, but being a health coach from this world, you can now provide that to the everyday person. And you can provide them with both of these worlds that haven't merged yet together fully, that they've probably never even heard. For example, I'm thinking of someone that I know who was struggling with, they were pre-diabetic and their doctor said, this is still reversible if you change your diet. And so in the meantime, though, they were on like metformin or something like that. And they had actually just had a baby. So they had to be really careful with like insulin levels. And so they kept them on the conventional medicine while they improved their everyday lifestyle routine. And so that's just a little example of both of those happening at the same time. And I think it's the perfect segue into you telling us a little more as a health coach, how you work with clients to meet both those needs.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. And that's funny that you mentioned that, because I remember telling Maggie this a few weeks ago, that I like had this light bulb moment where I realized that I don't have to choose between following like my love of science and wanting to like dive deep into the research and really understand how things work, and going down the more Eastern spiritual Ayurveda, like very natural, holistic approach to our health. Like I was like, oh, I can do both. I get to do both. And that it was such an amazing feeling knowing that like I get to, now that I'm starting my own business, I get to choose to bring those two things together, because they do, like, even though they can be worlds apart, and they are, but they also mesh really well together. So my role as a functional medicine health coach, or just as we can take the functional medicine part out, as a health coach, what I really consider myself as would be an expert in behavior change, which is something that most people probably don't think about when they think of a health coach. They're like, oh, you're going to give me an exercise plan or a meal plan. And while yes, those are very important aspects to our health, really what anything that we're trying to change in our life that relates to our health, it all comes down to our behaviors. So knowing how to ask the right questions and evoke this feeling in somebody of why they want to be healthy and what it is that they can do today to start making their way in the right direction. That's what I like to do as a health coach, is just start with the basics and let somebody discover, let my client discover what health means to them, and then help them get there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes so much
Maggie,
sense.
do you feel warm inside?
I do feel warm inside. I do. It makes so much sense. And as someone who is a coach, I do the same thing. And I know from working with you, because we have worked together before, as professionals, you really do have a way of asking people questions to dig a little deeper and figure out, why maybe they're asking that initial question in the first place, and how does it relate to what they value, and how does it relate to what they want their life to look like, and how does it, how can we break it down into a smaller piece that is manageable and attainable and something that they can change and actually see a result from, right? And how can we break it down so that way they're not feeling so overwhelmed? And it is so incredible that we have people like you in this world to help us reach our goals in ways that actually work, right? And like just change our perspective of what health is and see that it can be something unique to us, and it doesn't have to be what mainstream media says it is, right? Like we can accomplish anything that we want to. And I just love seeing you help people do that. It's so great.
Thank you.
You're
I
welcome.
want to kind of like transition us into something. When we knew you were coming on, I was like, okay, I really am interested, and I think our listeners will be interested to hear a conversation specifically around kind of like how do we. So I think our listeners pretty much already know this, but Danielle, just tiny bit of background. I, like many people, super diet world, back and forth, hot and cold, just a whole hot mess.
Mm-hmm.
Then I transitioned to more of an intuitive eating approach by Evelyn Tribbley's model, right? And then now I've kind of transitioned to, okay, I don't want to be on a strict diet. And I also eating whatever I want, whenever I want, even following the principles lightly was also a little too loose for me.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm kind of in this middle ground place. And after being in this middle ground place, I've gotten really curious about blood sugar. And that sounds really, really boring just to start, but you will be able to explain to people how people are affected by their blood sugar levels without them even noticing it. So once I dove into a lot of like Kelly LeVeque's work because I was so curious. I see you shaking your head, and we talked before. I know you love her too. But I was like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. Like, of course, I want to let my body, tell me when I'm hungry, tell me when I'm full. And if it's 4:00 and technically I'm only eating 3 meals a day because it's best for my blood sugar, but I need a bridge snack, I'm going to eat it, right? But learning how to balance everything within my body in a simple way has been a game changer for me. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that to our listeners of how they can also achieve this like more balanced way of energy throughout the day because of a lot of those things. I think it's really important.
Yeah, definitely. Well, yes, Kelly LeVeque, I love her. I've been following her for a lot of years, but I I think the word balance, when we're not talking about anything specific, sometimes gets overused, in my opinion. So one word, and not that there's not a place for it, but when we're talking about our health, sometimes I really like to use the word harmony instead of balance. And this came from one of my teachers, because when we're talking about our health in general, we can come back to the blood sugar piece, but sometimes we don't want things to be balanced. Like when I think of balance, you think of a scale, like things are equal when they're balanced, right? But that doesn't really work when we're talking about our health, because there are aspects of health, like, yes, having a meal with your family that doesn't necessarily meet your nutrition goals is not healthy sometimes in the sense of physiologically. But when we're all together, when you're having a meal with your family and you're connecting and you're feeling love and you're feeling these emotions that you can only get from your family, that is healthy, right? But we don't want to be doing those things all the time. So there's a harmony between these different areas of our life. Like sometimes we eat 3 square meals a day and we're totally hitting all of our marks and we feel really great. And sometimes we, and I'm speaking from experience, sometimes we like have an edible and watch funny movies that make our brain kind of dumb and eat snacks and like just be silly. Mm-hmm. And that's okay too, but I'm not balancing those two things. I'm not making those things equal in my life, but there's a harmony between them.
I like that.
Yeah. So I just wanted to start there because I know that like thinking about it that way really made me shift, you know, my mindset. Just that simple word switch was really helpful to think like, oh, I don't need to have everything balanced, but are these different areas of my life working in harmony?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. And the reason why I brought it up is because, and we can go like more in detail, and it may not even be necessary to go in detail, but just learning that for me, at least, I didn't have to pick one or the other anymore, right? Because Maggie and I talk about this all the time, but sometimes, especially in our media, there's like different camps of thought, right? Where some think that like dieting is the devil and it's the worst thing that ever existed. And then others think that being body positive and, you know, being whatever size is the worst thing that's ever happened. So there's a lot of different thoughts out there. And so for me, I really love the word harmony because that just feels more alignment with what I believe in, but also being able to make meals for myself that, for example, my meal today for lunch, like starting with a bed of greens and then adding ground bison and adding, you know, some chickpeas. And then I'm like recreating my lunch right here for you guys. You're welcome for the recipe. And then adding like feta cheese on top, and then knowing like, okay, I need some fats. Let me do some avocado, like having the knowledge of breaking down what my body tends to enjoy the most, and then sprinkling on top tortilla chips that definitely, I got them from a takeout place. They definitely had red dye and blue dye because there's no way those were natural chips. On top, it added that crunch that I needed that felt like harmony to me, where it's not the most boring thing in the world. So I just find that really empowering. And thank you for speaking to that for people who are like, you know, you want to make things simple and easy, but we live in the United States. Like, I love hot Cheetos. Like, you know what I mean? Like, how do we find?
Yeah, no, that's so true. And, you know, I think about that all the time, how like our modern world, yes, it's amazing. And there are so many cool things that we get to do these days. Like Maggie was just saying the other day, like, how cool is it that we literally have access to anything that we want to learn, like talking about just podcasting. Anything we want to learn about or listen to, we have access to.
I know.
And that's amazing. But also our modern world is really not set up for us to be healthy. We kind of have to fight against it. And so that is kind of a good segue into talking about blood sugar, if that's where you guys want to go. Because sugar is, you know, it is sort of, I don't like to talk about foods as like good foods or bad foods because all food has its place. That being said, we all know that processed sugar is detrimental to our health. And when we're talking about blood sugar, we're not just talking about the white sugar that comes in a bag at the grocery store, right? So blood sugar is actually blood glucose, and blood glucose is what our body produces from any type of carbohydrate that we eat. So even, you know, we eat blueberries, those are carbohydrates. They break down, our body breaks it, those different, you know, so the fiber will go into your intestines, the blood sugar will get absorbed through your intestinal wall into your bloodstream. So then there's particles of glucose in your blood. And what happens after the glucose enters the bloodstream in a body that's working properly is that the pancreas will produce insulin, which is a hormone. And this hormone insulin is sort of like the key that unlocks the cells of your body to let glucose in, because that's where the glucose wants to be, is inside of ourselves, where it can be used to make energy. I'm just going to stop there and see if you have any questions or want me to explain anything further.
Maggie probably already knows a lot of this. I have a very basic understanding, but I'm so like on the edge of my seat, curious, learning. So
no.
Okay.
Keep going.
Okay. So insulin unlocks the cells to let the glucose in, so that we can, you know, our muscles can function and we can do the things that we need to do. with our body. If there's an excess amount of blood sugar, sometimes there's like our cells become saturated, right? Like, so our muscles absorb all the glucose that they can. So if there's excess blood sugar, that's going to go to a couple of places, but one of the places is your liver. And it's just kind of like, that's where it gets stored. If then our blood sugar is so high that the liver, it's in all of our cells, it's in our liver, it's being stored, we can't store anymore, it just stays in the bloodstream. And this is where over time we can have like a pre-diabetic level of blood glucose. So our levels of glucose are just too high for too long. The other side of that is when that happens is that insulin eventually can't keep up. And it stops responding. It's kind of like the boy who cried wolf, right? Like, you keep calling, you keep raising your blood sugar, you keep causing your body to produce insulin. The more and more that happens, your body eventually is just going to be like, all right, this isn't really working. I'm going to stop opening up your muscles and your cells to let glucose in because like I can't keep up. So that's what we call insulin resistance. And that is what most people don't know, is elevated glucose and elevated insulin are two of like the biggest contributing factors to many of our chronic diseases. And there are a lot of different ways we can go with this, but where do you want to go next? That was just sort of like my brief explanation of how blood sugar works.
Yeah, so thank you for that. I think everyone has a very clear picture of this process, right? And this is something that we hear all the time is, oh, balance your blood sugar, or, we need to pay attention to how much sugar is in things, or, oh, we need to make sure our insulin is working. But like, how does that actually work? I think it's very important that we all have a basic understanding of how this process actually works, right? Because how can we take steps to improve our health and harmonize our blood sugar and not have such huge spikes and dips if we don't know how the process works, right? And like, I am more inclined to want to dive into the process and like, tell me how everything works. I need to know every single step. I know not everyone is like that, but when we can have a basic understanding of the process, it helps everything, right? So a little recap of what you're saying. So you said we eat food, right? And then our body breaks it down and all the glucose goes into our bloodstream, right? So then when there's glucose in the bloodstream, insulin is released, and the insulin says to our muscles, hey, like, go get all the blood sugar, right? And it takes it out of the bloodstream. And if we have too much sugar in the bloodstream, then it will go to the liver. And then if we still have too much sugar, it will be in the muscles, in the liver, and be staying in the bloodstream, right? And that's when we have that happen too often. That's when it leads us down the road to chronic illness, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. So I think where I would like to go next is a combination of what can we do to avoid that place of having blood sugar in our bloodstream all the time, right? Like, how can we actually have it absorbed and work properly, right? And then to maybe off of that as well, like if you are in that place of, your doctor said your blood sugar is too high, maybe like what are a couple things that we can do to come back into harmony, not balance, harmony.
Yes. And don't have to use that word, but like, yes,
I like it though. I like it. I like the word shift. We talk about word shifts all the time. So I like that one. Yeah.
And I say balance constantly. So it's good for me to have a new word. It's
always good. Okay. So now I forgot your first question.
The first question, I think it was, I think we're going to make up a new one because I don't remember either. No, it was like, what do we do to make sure that when we eat, our blood sugar is doing what it's supposed to do, right? How do we not have it always in our system?
Yes. Okay. So I think the easiest, first kind of like the lowest hanging fruit when we're talking about not elevating our blood sugar too high is to think of the types of carbohydrates that we eat and how quickly they get broken down. So something like a processed carbohydrate, or like we'll say straight sugar, like pure table sugar, white sugar, that's going to get broken down really, really quickly in the body. And that's going to cause what you were saying, a spike. So it's going to make our blood sugar go up really quickly. That makes it harder on the body to use up that insulin, use up that blood glucose, because insulin has to kind of work double time. So when we think about something on the opposite end of that spectrum, going back, I like the blueberry example.
Mm-hmm.
A blueberry has carbohydrates, but it also has water and it has fiber. So the fiber is going to slow down the absorption of the glucose into our bloodstream. Mm-hmm. So just that by itself, we're now looking at a blood sugar level of going from either with the table sugar going way up and then way down with a burst of insulin. Whereas with the blueberry, it's sort of gradually increasing, and it's not going to cause that same kind of crash. And I know a blueberry is very small. I'm talking a handful of blueberries to be realistic. Who eats just one blueberry?
Yeah, nobody. But okay, so the difference we're talking about here is a whole food, right, with multiple components versus a processed food where we're essentially just taking the sugar and putting it into the food, right? I loved the example that you gave when we did our wellness series of a Skittle versus a blueberry, right? And we can also take a handful of Skittles versus a handful of blueberries if you want to imagine it that way too. But so when we have the blueberries, which is the whole food, which has the carbohydrates, but also the water and the fiber, we're not only getting that gradual spike in blood glucose, but we're also getting a more gradual decrease, right?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Because the quicker that the glucose is entering your blood, the quicker your body wants to get rid of it. So we want to be producing steady amounts of insulin after we eat, rather than our body kind of freaking out and it like I said, surging out a bunch of insulin that's just gonna then make your blood sugar drop, which is also not good. Just we don't want a huge spike, we don't want a huge drop, because that's what's gonna make us feel crappy and give us cravings.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, it's not exactly related, but you can tell me if it may be. I started learning more. I became interested when I learned about this about coffee. Okay. So tell me if this branches off into what we're talking about. But someone told me, because I love coffee, but I don't love having coffee in the morning and then having a dip in energy. So I had learned through some research that if you take a caffeine molecule and whip it with a fat lipid, it creates a slower burn. So mm-hmm. I started taking my coffee in the morning and whipping it with coconut oil. And I noticed a difference, that I wasn't as jittery, and it was a nice slower pace for me, which is then what got me curious about blood sugar, because I used to know, you can even go back to previous podcast episodes, Maggie would always be like, Maggie, you have to eat breakfast, or have something. I was like, no, Maggie, I don't want my breakfast. I don't like breakfast. I'm not doing it. And then when you start to breakfast, I noticed such a big difference in my mood, my overall. So for anyone who's more like me, Maggie, and you could probably nerd out over this forever. And I have my moments, but you both you have the education behind you in it. This is more your world. So I love that I have the contrast here of our everyday listeners who are okay, that sounds amazing. And the science is super interesting. And by the way, if you're interested in more, Danielle will link all of her stuff below. Go work with her. She's ready to have these conversations now. But for the everyday person who's okay, cool, but why? Why am I doing that? Yeah. I want to bring the contrast, not even the contrast, just the light of, you notice a difference in how you feel. So the science is there for a reason. What Danielle is saying to you of the slower, energy and all this stuff and all this really sciencey, cool, nerdy information. What I notice as the everyday human is if my meals are more balanced and I'm giving my body what it needs, I don't have that 2 p.m. crash, right? Where you feel like you need to go take a nap, or you don't have the morning like come down when you're like, oh my gosh, I need another cup of coffee just to get going again. And so I think that for anyone listening who's like, okay, cool, but why do I want this? The feeling alone, like I would even suggest if you're curious and you're, wondering, start with like a day of doing your normal stuff and then a day of balancing these things. You will notice a difference immediately.
Yeah.
At least I always do. Like you won't notice probably like in your blood work and stuff like that, but in the feeling and your energy levels, I notice a difference very quickly. Whereas if I take like a Sunday and I like, let's say I'm on the road and I'm eating, out, stuff like that, and then the next day I'm home, like in my normal routine, I notice a difference that quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it really is. Our blood sugar is one of those things that it's constantly changing. It doesn't take long for us to have an impact on it, but and we do have control over it. So I'm thank you for bringing me into reality, because I can definitely get stuck in the the science and all the details of things. So when we're talking about really practical, like tangible things to do, the first one that always comes to my mind is start your day with enough protein.
Mm-hmm.
And this ties back into like our modern world being set up basically for us to fail. When we think of all the common breakfast foods, cereal, especially for kids, like this, it hurts me when I see like the things that are being advertised as kids' breakfast, Pop-Tarts, all these sugary cereals, even just
Bagels,
toast,
muffins.
bagels, yes, pastries, like those things are all amazing and delicious, but they do not support us in, when we're talking about using them as a meal or having them as a meal. So I know I've mentioned this to Maggie before, we talked about it in our wellness series, but just the idea of like, put clothing on your carbs. Don't have any naked carbs. So if you like toast, if you want toast for breakfast, that's fine. But put some avocado on it, put some almond butter or some peanut butter on it, have it with some eggs, pair it with protein or fat or fiber or all three.
Yeah, ideally all of those, yes.
Because that's what we're looking to do. The protein is going to blunt that blood sugar spike. The fat is going to blunt that blood sugar spike. And if we can start our day with a really nice, rolling hill rather than up and down roller coaster, it's going to carry into the rest of our day. So it's just like you guys have talked about on this show before, how you start your morning matters. The first thing that you eat in the morning matters. You start your day with a donut, I mean, you're like, I'm sure everybody listening has done that and has noticed the effects of what happens throughout the day. So really starting with your breakfast and having protein and having, putting cloves on your carbs always, but most importantly at breakfast.
I love that. It's such a, like, imagine the blueberries with little coats on them, but like, that's like where my brain goes. But
that's amazing.
It's such an easy analogy once you understand what carbs are and what the clothes are, right? Like, what is the carb and what are the clothes? And so then we can pair them together. And that is something, I think this is going to tie nicely into the next topic that we wanted to discuss, which is mindful eating and being present. And with that, I'd also like to talk about becoming aware of the food that we're eating, right? Because it's one thing to be mindful that we are eating, right? It's one thing to be mindful of the actual foods that are on the plate. And then it's another thing to be mindful and aware of what we're choosing before we actually eat it and why. Right. And so I'd love to get into that a little bit, and just mindfulness and awareness when it comes to food and anything else health related that you want to talk about. But how can we take steps to become more mindful and aware of both what we are eating and why we're going to make food choices?
Yeah. awareness is something that completely changed my life. And I say that because I feel like I lived most of my, my younger years and even my early adulthood without being very aware of myself or my surroundings. I've always considered myself to be a health conscious person, but there's a difference between being health conscious and being aware of actually what's going on around you and inside of you. So thank you for bringing that up, because that is becoming aware. And this was really through my yoga teacher training where all this sort of that was the catalyst for all of this for me. A huge part of my training was in the yoga of awareness. So just like you said, learning how to become aware. And little things that I started noticing, were like when the flowers bloom in the spring. I've lived all of my life in upstate New York, and all of a sudden I'm noticing how amazing all of the flowers are in springtime. And I know that seems like such a little thing, but it was those little steps of looking around and paying attention are what really started my journey to true health for myself. So I just want to say that to start. And when it comes to eating, I think, like you said, there's a difference between being aware and being mindful. So mindful eating for me means I'm in the present moment when I'm eating. I'm not on my phone. I'm not reading something. I'm not watching something. I'm smelling my food. I'm looking at it. I'm putting it together in a way that makes it look good, right? Because when my food looks good, it's just more enjoyable. It's more satisfying. And then I'm really taking each bite and thinking about what it actually tastes like, not just shoveling it down and trying to eat. Sometimes we eat like that, and that's fine. Sometimes you just got to get it in and be on with your day. But when we really want it to be a more meaningful experience and slow down, just those simple things of what does this actually taste like? Where did this come from? Who is responsible for, the work that went into this food that I'm eating? It affects so much more than just me when I'm eating something. So those are just some things that I like to, bring into that. And then when it comes to our food choices, that I think is also where awareness comes in a little bit more than mindfulness. I mean, we can use them sort of interchangeably, but we get so stuck in our routines. And we, if you ask somebody oh, well, why do you have that for breakfast every morning? So, some people might say well, I don't know, I've just done it for years. We just get so caught up in these routines that we don't, first of all, notice that maybe it's not making us feel that great. Two, we don't think about it because it's just what we've always done. So that thing, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I think that for me, the easiest way to to start doing this is just by writing things down, writing your food down, starting a food journal. And then from there you can look at okay, this is what I've eaten for the past 3 days, or even just one day. And then seeing it on paper, you can say, just ask yourself those questions of why do I choose this food? How does this food make me feel? And then just going from there. It's, yeah.
I originally had 2 thoughts. Now I have 3 because of what you just said. I'm going to start with what you just left off on, because I really, really love that, because I used to keep a food journal, but I kept a food journal to measure calories, and I was a crazy person about it. And my trainer at the time was also crazy about it and wanted to see, exactly what I was eating. And so I had a very now I'm oof, I don't want to do any of that.
Yeah.
But I've never heard it come from a place of, this is just to take inventory. How does it make you feel? What are you eating? It just gives you a visual of what you're consuming, instead of, for me, my negative experience of it was, okay, oh my gosh, I have 200 calories left. What is the lowest calorie option? And it'd be like some weird bar that had, 30 chemicals in it, right? Like the weirdest things ever. So I really appreciate that you've just turned over a new thing for me that I thought couldn't be a thing. And so for your clients and for those listening, what a beautiful way to just start to get a snapshot of what you're even interacting with. What a beautiful way to get mindful. Two things are coming up for me. And the one, it really like does something inside of my body, which means for me that it's a place that I'm really passionate about. And I've already known that. And it's coming up again. My days of like school psych world, like being in the schools, if anyone's listening who works in a school or you're a teacher or somebody like that, that a common word thrown around about children is they're dysregulated, meaning like, AKA they're a hot mess, AKA most of the time, I'm going to talk very bluntly, most of the time people are pushing for them to go and get an ADD, ADHD diagnosis, right? And that's just the cold, hard truth because they are quote unquote dysregulated. Now there is a time and a place for ADHD and ADD. Those are both very clinical DSM-5, beautiful, needs of a lot of people. Not every single student that I saw needed that. And I always felt so out of place because I would go down to the cafeteria and I'd be curious, what did Johnny have for breakfast? And I was so disappointed every single time. There was not one day that I went down to the cafeteria and was like, wow, okay, nice, balanced, at least something that has a little bit of balance. I'm talking Rice Krispie treats for breakfast with a juice. Okay. Mm-hmm. And that is what the kids are eating in our country. And I am not saying that this is like, okay, we got to fix that right away. We need to fix that soon. We as a system, as a collective, as people, we need to change that. And you don't start to change that. Parents don't start to challenge that until they have the knowledge for themselves. And then they can fight for it for the schools. And that's why conversations like this are so, so, so important, is because most people don't even know enough to start to challenge it. And that's what we're doing here. That's what other podcasts do. They provide you with the information so that we can make systemic level changes. And so when I see what the children are starting their days with, like, no wonder he's dysregulated. Of course he is. He just had 45 grams of sugar and now he's coming down from that. And like, to me, it was such a bold question and it shouldn't be. So a lot of people would look at me when I was in that spot, in that position, and they'd be like, what? Like, that doesn't matter. Like, that's genuinely the thoughts I got a lot of times. And I was like, no, but it does. And look, here it is. We're making it matter in a different lens. But I also, my second thought along with that of how much harmony and beauty, Danielle, in what you're saying alone. And Maggie, I know you're really present in your family with Cosmos and the way that you just have a meal with family. But like, to me, it gives me such a warm, fulfilling feeling to have, the windows open and you're having a beautiful meal and you're sitting down and you're talking. And like you said, Danielle, like, your food looks good and you have things in there that are nutrient dense. And I think that there's so much value just in those visuals for people to have for themselves to start to transition their lives to a more holistic view of what health means in a way that's not all or nothing. And I really think you do an incredible job of highlighting that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's health in general, I feel like is such even for me, like, it's an overwhelming concept, right? There are so many different components to our health that it can be like, you know what, like you said, like the all or nothing, like I feel like I don't know where to start, so I'm just not going to, like, I'm not going to take any steps towards getting healthier because I don't know which one to take first. And that's also like my goal as a health coach, is to help my clients figure out where to start, because it's not going to be the same for everybody, like, do I always want people to address their diet? Of course I do. But for some people, that's not where they want to start. They, for whatever reason, whether it's an emotional attachment that they have to their food, or whether it's a financial thing, they're like, nope, I'm sticking with this budget and I don't want to change it. That's okay. Like, I'm meeting them where they're at, because forcing somebody to start where it doesn't feel right or where they're not going to make that needle shift at all, it's pointless. It's pointless, and it doesn't help anybody.
Yeah, that is one of the things about the health industry and world, and that is, I think though that it is slowly changing, is that it's not welcoming, it's overwhelming. It's has to be either you do everything or you do nothing, right? And that's one of our main goals on this show, is to show people that you can do it, right? No matter where you are, you can do it. And it is so important that we meet people where they're at,
Maggie,
right? But the idea of health, it doesn't need to be so large and overwhelming and uninviting, right? Because that's what happens is I see so many people, and it happens to me too when I'm trying to do something new when it comes to improving my health, is that it feels like there's this giant wall up, right? Like there's this giant wall between me and the thing that I want. And it is so hard to get over it and to get to the other side of even starting, right? And so how can we take this giant, overwhelming concept of health, right, and break it down into smaller, more achievable, less overwhelming, tiny pieces that will actually help us make changes and get results and feel better, right? Because if we try to tackle everything all at once, we're not going to accomplish anything anyway, right? So how can we take it and make it a little bit smaller, right, and more achievable, and then actually start to see some results, feel better, right? Like make it small enough that we can actually pay attention to the changes and actually see them, right? And so this like perfectly ties into, we've never had an episode flow so nicely from one topic we wanted to talk about to the next. Like this is incredible. I don't even know how this is happening. But the next thing that we wanted to talk about was your idea of keeping health simple and tools that you have to do so, right? Because that is exactly the problem, is it's too complicated, it's too big, it's too overwhelming, right? So how do you take your clients, and even for yourself, through this process of breaking it down and making it more simple and just more just like approachable. Thank you. That was the word. Yeah.
So I think where I would start, it's funny because actually the one thing that I really wanted to touch on was what you already said. It was just starting small. But this ties back to the idea of, how functional medicine really looks at your body as a whole. And it can be overwhelming, but what I like to think about, I'm going off a little bit off track here, but is, yes, there are numbers for our blood work and our weight and our measurements. There are all these numbers. We can focus on numbers. We can focus on these identifying aspects of health. But what is the feeling you're looking for? That's really what I like to ask, because health is individual. And just like our bodies are individual, health means something different to everybody. So for me, being healthy feels like having a clear head. It feels like being light, like not being weighed down by the food that I'm eating or by my muscles being not sore in the sense of like working out, but like just heavy, and stagnant. That's kind of a word I would use. It's just like stagnant. When my body feels stagnant, I don't feel healthy. So looking at that feeling, what are things that I need to do to give myself that feeling? I need to make sure I'm drinking enough water so that I don't have brain fog. I need to be hydrated so that my brain is working. I need to move my body. I need to go for a walk. I need to do yoga or a workout so that my body doesn't feel heavy, I need to choose foods that I know make me feel good because I am aware of the way that certain foods make me feel, because I have put in this work. I've put in the work to figure out what foods make me feel good and what foods don't. So that's the way I like to approach it with clients, is like, what is this vision that you have for your health, and what is the feeling that you want to get? Because we can look at somebody else and see like, oh, they look really healthy, let's see what they do. But that might not work for you. So, and you don't know what they're really feeling, just because they look healthy doesn't mean that they feel healthy. So I would say is the one small thing that you can do to just really start, is ask yourself, how do I want to feel? And then from there, just like you said, Maggie, start small. Because if we say, okay, I'm going to start drinking more water, I'm going to only eat whole foods, I'm going to get myself on an exercise routine, I'm going to only surround myself with people who really make me feel really good. That's too many things, and we're going to do really well for maybe a week. And then we're going to go right back into our old routines. So pick that one thing that is going to move the needle the most, what's going to give you that strongest feeling of success in the first couple of days, or just even in the first day. If you set your goal at, I'm just going to drink enough water today, that's great, because then you're going to say tomorrow, wow, I drank enough water and I feel great and I can do that again today. And then the next day too. It's learning to trust ourselves by setting our goals smaller so that we can be successful, and we know that we'll follow through with the things we say we're going to do.
You're speaking our love language, Danielle.
Well, good. I'm glad.
This is our whole, like, Maggie and I are just looking at each other on Zoom. Like, this is our whole, everything we believe in, you are saying, and you're going to bring to clients, and will truly change their lives in such a way. We like the analogy, we've used it. I don't remember if I came up with it or you came up with it, Maggie, a while ago, where we used to say, like, health can feel like the popular kids in school. Like, you look at them and like they're shiny and like golden and cool, but they're like unapproachable and unattainable. And so you just kind of stare and you're curious, and you may like, I'm really here, and you may like buy like a shirt that they have, but like you'll never have their wardrobe. Like, I feel I really went down a rabbit hole with that one. But
that's okay. I like it.
It was fantastic. Thank you. And so I feel like it is such an approachable way to view our lives and our health. And one of my favorite things, I learned it in my Psych 101 class. It was the first class I took in college. And I had a professor named Professor Boyd, Edward Boyd, and I love him so much. He was like 80 years old and the most precious man. Anyways, he told us, he said, a lot of you are going to go on and be psychologists, and, you're going to work in the field of psych and blah, blah. And he said, the one thing, I don't care what you get out of this 4-year degree, get nothing else out of it. You need to get that individual differences trump everything. And people's individual needs trump everything in this field. They trump science. Sometimes they trump, research. Like, individual needs are really important. And what I think is so powerful about this conversation, though, is that yes, we are focusing on individuals and individual needs, but those needs, as we are all able to identify what we need and how we need to live our lives collectively, that can be more systemic, in that the more lives we change, the happier our climate is, the happier the culture is, the happier your neighbors are. And the happiness is not always the goal. More neutrality, Maggie and I like to talk about. Happiness is fleeting, but the more fulfilling this life can feel and be. And I think that that's a beautiful way to describe where people can start, is how do you want to feel? And then let's realistically get there.
Yeah. Yeah. And oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's okay. I want to go back to the one thing you said, Danielle, before you go on, is just, you gave the example of, I'm just going to drink enough water today. right? I'm just going to drink enough water today. And then maybe tomorrow when I wake up, I'm going to feel really good and then drink enough water again tomorrow, right? Something I see so often is we think, okay, well, if I drink enough water today, but I don't do it tomorrow, it doesn't count. Right. Like we kind of get into this, to this weird mindset of like, well, if I don't do it every day for the rest of forever, it doesn't matter. Right. And that's not how health works. Right. Every little thing that you do that is a step towards the healthy life that you want, whatever it looks like for you, whatever you want it to feel like for you, counts. Every single one, right? And every single one is helping you build momentum to being more consistent, to feeling healthier every day instead of just some days, right? And I just really wanted to touch on that because I think it goes back into what we were just talking about starting small and making it approachable. Is we can't set ourselves up for failure by feeling like we have to make a change and do it for the rest of our lives every single day and be perfect, right? And even when we are approaching that feeling, right, whatever we want health to feel like, even when we are as consistent as we'll ever be, it's still not going to be perfect. It's still not going to, you're still not going to feel that way 100% of the time. And so I think that is one of the biggest mental roadblocks that we put ourselves through, is feeling like it's all or nothing, right? Which is the entire point of why we talk about these things, because it's not.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. And I'm guilty of doing that to myself, like I've been eating really clean or really well for this many days. And like, then I didn't eat really well this one day. So now it's all ruined, right? Like, no, that's not how it works. It's, there is no wagon that people talk about falling off of, right? Like I really like taking that out of the picture. Like there's no wagon to fall off of, like you're creating that wagon. So, and it's not about saying like, well, I didn't drink enough water today, so like, what's the point in doing it tomorrow? Like, no, that's silly. When we're talking about getting off of track, okay, like sure, we can go off of our path, but it's how connecting back to that vision that you have for yourself of what health is and what that feels like, and then correcting that path, not just saying, oh, well, I'm too far away. No, you can always get back, right? So if you stayed up too late the night before, or you ate like crap and you didn't sleep well, the next day you can say, well, I don't feel good, so I'm just not going to do anything good for myself. Or you can say, you know what? I made some choices yesterday that I'm not so proud of, but today I'm going to make those choices that I know make me feel good. I'm going to start my day with a really nutrient-dense breakfast. I'm going to go for a walk, probably because I don't have enough energy to actually do an exercise. So I'm going to go for a walk and I'm going to drink some water and I'm going to move on with my day. It's how I think about those, like, those punching bags, not punching bags, but these things that you had as a kid that had like a weight in the bottom and you could punch it and it would like fall down and then it would automatically come back up.
Yes.
It's like, we can look at our health like that. Like, yeah, things are going to punch it down and we're going to do that too. Like we're going to push ourselves down, but how quickly are we getting back up? Because that's every time you get back up, you're not getting back up because you failed. You're getting back up because you're resilient and you're not letting it keep you down. And I feel like I'm kind of getting a little out there with that analogy, but it's not staying consistent every single day. It's just in the grand scheme of your life, doing more things that make you feel good than not. And having your choices work for you, not against you. Like if you're looking at health and you're like, well, kale is healthy, I'm going to eat kale, even though I hate kale. No, if you hate kale, don't eat it. Like I am never gonna be that person, that professional, that nutrition professional, health professional that is like, you must eat your kale. Like, no, if you don't like kale, don't eat it. Because that's not going to make you happy. And if it's not going to make you happy, then that's it's not going to make you healthy either, no matter how hard you try.
I love this conversation so much. This has to be one of my favorite episodes we ever recorded, because it's just so, the feeling I have inside is like, I honestly think, this is a little nostalgic, but I honestly think it's because like 16-year-old Meg like needed you and us and this collective so badly. Like I needed someone to look me in my eyes and be like, there is a simpler way. Like you don't have to hate your body thin. You don't have to like, force yourself to eat healthy all week and then binge on the weekends because that was so hard. Like I just think maybe that's why I'm feeling so like just all the feelings inside, is because I needed this so desperately. And knowing now that we as a collective and you individually, Danielle, like we can give this to someone who needs it, is one of the best feelings that I could ever have. And I'm so grateful that you decided to come on our show, because you now have given that to our audience as well.
Thank you. That means a lot to me, because I have this knowledge, and I've practiced these things myself, but that doesn't do anything if I don't do anything with it, and I've been afraid of that for so long, of, like I keep learning and keep getting this experience, but I'm not doing anything with it. And I've moved past that fear of feeling like I'm not going to do anything with it, because I know I am, because I have to, because I don't have a choice anymore. It's like it built up inside of me, and now I just need to let it out.
And so you are.
So I'm really grateful also that you guys asked me to be on here, and that it has had an impact on you alone. And I hope that it has an impact on anybody who listens.
Yeah, I'm sure that it has. I agree. This is a fantastic conversation. I don't care what anyone else thinks. I think that it was, but I know that this was so jam-packed full of value, and I know that everyone listening took at least one thing out of this conversation. So thank you. Danielle, I would love for you to let everyone know where they can find you.
Okay, well, you can find me on Instagram. You can type in my name, Danielle Tallman. I think my handle is Danielle E. Tallman. So that's just my name again. I will give you guys I'm on Facebook too, but I don't have a website yet. I'm in the process of making it. And you can always reach out to me via email. I will give you guys my email. You have my email, so you can put it in the show notes. Please feel free. Anybody who's listening who wants some guidance, wants to work with me, or just ask me questions, please reach out to me. And that's funny. The last small tip that I had, that to just keep health simple, is don't do it alone, because you don't have to do it alone, and there's no shame in not doing it alone. Seek advice, even if it's not me. Seek advice from somebody who has knowledge and experience with whatever it is you're looking to find, and whatever it is that feeling is that you want. Find somebody who can help guide you there.
Thank you so much for coming on our show, Danielle. We will link, yes, Maggie is the queen of doing our captions and all of our write-ups. So she will link everything in the show notes, and everyone go find Danielle, and thank you for listening today.
Thank you.
We'll catch you next week. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the entirety of this episode. If you found this episode valuable, please share it with a friend. Your support helps our show grow, and for that, we are extremely grateful. Please be sure to leave a 5-star rating and a review of the show. We'll see you next Monday with another episode of the Meg and Maggi Podcast.